My half-sister introduced me to her in-laws at the rehearsal dinner last spring, and the way she said my job, laughing like it was the punchline of a joke she'd been saving all night, made every single person at that table turn and look at me. "This is my sister," she said, waving her hand in my direction like she was pointing at a piece of furniture. "She's a school teacher. You know crayons and naptime." A few people smiled politely. Someone actually laughed. And then, from the far end of the table, the groom's mother set down her wine glass very slowly and looked at me like she recognized something she hadn't expected to see. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Heartwave Stories. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Zoe. I'm 32 years old and I teach third grade at a public elementary school in Columbus, Ohio. I have 23 students this year. I know all of their birthdays. I know which ones have trouble sitting still because they didn't eat breakfast, and which ones cry quietly during reading time because something is happening at home that no 8-year-old should have to carry. I have been doing this job for 9 years and I have never once been ashamed of it. But my half sister, Whitney, has always seen things differently. Whitney is 3 years older than me. We grew up in the same house after my mom married her dad when I was 6. From the outside, it probably looked like a normal blended family. 2 girls, 2 sets of grandparents at Christmas, family photos on the wall. But inside that house, the distance between us was always obvious. Whitney had her dad's last name, her dad's credit card, and her dad's full attention. I had my mom, a bedroom at the end of the hall, and a very clear understanding that I was the extra one. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for a long time, but I'm past that now. It's just the truth of how things were. Whitney went to a private high school, took a gap year in Europe, and eventually got a degree in marketing from a university in New York. She has a good job at a brand consulting firm, a nice apartment in Scottsdale, and a talent for making everything in her life look flawless on the outside. She is genuinely good at that. I'll give her that. She met her fiancé, Ryan, about 2 years ago. I'd only met him a handful of times before the wedding weekend. He seemed decent enough, quiet, measured, the kind of person who listened more than he talked. I couldn't figure out what he saw in Whitney exactly, but I also knew I wasn't seeing the full picture, so I kept that thought to myself. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room in a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with leather booths and low lighting and a menu that doesn't have prices on the guest copies. I wore a dark green wrap dress and drove myself there alone. I had taken 2 personal days from school to be there for the whole weekend, which meant I had spent the previous 3 evenings writing sub-plans detailed enough for a substitute to teach without me. That's the thing people don't know about teachers. The paperwork you do just to take a day off is sometimes more work than being there. I arrived a few minutes after the start time, which I felt bad about, and found my place at one of the long tables. Ryan's family was already seated nearby. His parents were at the head of the table, his dad, a tall man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and his mother, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, and a quality about her that I noticed immediately: calm. The kind of calm that comes from someone who has been through something and come out the other side of it steadier than before. I introduced myself to the people around me, ate the bread, and kept mostly to myself. I was doing what I always do at Whitney's events, which is stay quiet and try not to take up too much space. Then Whitney stood up. She tapped her knife against her glass, and the room settled. She smiled the way she always smiles at parties, wide and practiced and aimed at whoever she wants to impress most. "I want to take a second to introduce some people," she said. She went around the table, naming Ryan's cousins, his aunt who had flown in from Portland, his college roommate. And then she got to me. "And this," she said, turning to face me and gesturing with her champagne glass, "is my little sister, Zoe." She paused for just a half second, that specific pause she has always used when something is coming. "She is a school teacher, elementary school, third grade." She laughed lightly. "Crayons and nap time. We love her for it." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the table. Not mean laughter, just the kind people do automatically when someone in charge of the mood signals that something is funny. Ryan looked slightly uncomfortable. I looked at my bread plate. I didn't say anything. I smiled the way I've been smiling at Whitney's jokes my entire adult life. I had learned years ago that reacting only gives her more material to work with. But something else happened in that moment. From the far end of the table, Ryan's mother, whose name I would later learn was Linda, set her wine glass down. Not loudly, just deliberately, and she looked at me, not the way people look when they are being politely curious, the way people look when something has clicked into place in their memory, and they're not sure yet if they're right. I noticed it but didn't understand it. I looked away. The dinner continued. More toasts were made, appetizers arrived, conversations broke into smaller groups. Whitney moved around the room the way she always does at her own events, gracious, glowing, entirely in her element. I talked to Ryan's cousin for a while about her drive up from Tucson, and then to the aunt from Portland about a hiking trail she'd done recently. Normal dinner conversation. But every few minutes I felt it. That sense that someone was watching me from across the table. I glanced up once and caught Linda looking again. She didn't look away quickly or seem embarrassed about it. She just held my gaze for a second and then looked down at her plate, like she was still working something out. Ryan noticed his mother's expression at some point. I saw him lean toward her slightly and say something quietly. She shook her head once, not dismissively, more like she was saying, "Not yet. I'm still thinking." I told myself I was imagining it. I focused on my food. The main course came. The conversation got louder as people relaxed into the evening. Brittany was telling a story about their first trip together to Sedona, and people were laughing, and the room had settled into that warm, loose feeling that good food and open bars tend to create. And then Linda spoke. She didn't announce herself or tap a glass. She just spoke at a volume that carried across her end of the table, in the middle of a pause in the surrounding conversation. "Zoe," she said. I looked up. She was watching me steadily. "I'm sorry to ask out of nowhere," she said, "but did you ever teach at Riverside Elementary in Grove City?" The table around us went a little quieter. I felt the shift in attention. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I was there for 4 years before I transferred to my current school." Linda set both her hands flat on the table. She exhaled through her nose, slow and even. "I thought so," she said quietly. Ryan looked between us. "Mom, what is it?" She didn't answer him right away. She was still looking at me. "Do you remember," she said carefully, "a boy named Colin? He would have been in your class about 6 years ago. Second or third grade." And just like that, something opened up in my memory. Colin. Of course, I remembered Colin. I would like to say that I remember every student equally, and I do try. But some students stay with you in a way that goes beyond the normal end of year goodbye. Colin was one of those. He was in my second grade class the year I was still at Riverside. He was small for his age, very quiet, and he used to come to school with his sneakers on the wrong feet about 3 times a week. Not because he didn't know he did by November, but because he was getting himself ready in the morning alone. His mother had been hospitalized for several months that year. I never knew all the details, I only knew what I could see, which was a 7-year-old trying very hard to hold himself together. I stayed late with him twice a week that whole year. We did homework together. I kept a box of clackers in my desk drawer that was technically for the whole class, but was mostly for him. On his birthday in February, I brought in cupcakes and he cried when we sang to him and then immediately tried to pretend he hadn't. I still think about that sometimes. At the end of the year, he gave me a drawing he had made of the two of us standing in front of the classroom. In the drawing, I was about 6 feet tall and wearing a cape. I still have it. It's in a frame in my apartment. I looked at Linda. "Yes," I said. "I remember Colin very well." Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together for a moment before she spoke. "He's my grandson," she said. "My daughter's son." The table had gone almost completely quiet now. Even Whitney had stopped talking. "That was the year my daughter was sick," Linda continued. "She was in the hospital for almost 8 months. Colin's father was working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. There was no one." She paused. He came home every day that year and told us about his teacher. He talked about you constantly. You were. She stopped, collected herself. You were the most stable thing in his life that year. When everything at home was falling apart, you were the one constant he had. I didn't know what to say. I never know what to say when someone tells me something like that because from where I'm standing, I was just doing what teachers do. I was just showing up. He's 14 now, Linda said. She was smiling through her eyes, even though her voice was still careful. He plays soccer. He plays soccer. He's doing really well in school. He talks about wanting to be an engineer someday. She paused again. I don't think he would be the kid he is right now if you hadn't been his teacher that year. The silence at the table was different now. It wasn't the polite, surface level quiet of people waiting for the next course. It was the kind of quiet that settles over a room when something real has entered it. Ryan's father cleared his throat. He looked at his wife, then at me. You never told us who she was, he said to Linda. I didn't know her last name, Linda said. Colin always just called her Miss Zoe. She looked across the table at me, and her expression was straightforward and warm and completely sincere. I have wanted to thank you for 6 years, she said. I just never found the right way to do it. I became aware then that the entire table was looking at me, not the way they'd looked when Whitney introduced me, not with polite amusement or the mild interest people pay to the less important people at an event like this. They were looking at me the way people look when they've just learned something that rearranged how they understood the room. I felt my throat tighten. I'm not someone who cries easily in front of people. 9 years in a classroom will cure that pretty fast, but I felt the pressure of it in my chest. He was a wonderful kid, I said, and I meant it with my whole heart. He was so brave that year. I hope you'll tell him that someone is very proud of the person he's becoming. Linda nodded. She reached across the table. It was a stretch. The table was long and briefly touched my hand. I will tell him, she said. There was a beat of silence. Then Ryan's father said, quietly but clearly, that's not crayons and naptime. He didn't say it looking at Whitney. He said it looking at me. But there was no way for anyone at that table to miss what he meant. I heard someone near me exhale. I saw one of Ryan's cousins drop her eyes to her plate. Whitney had gone very still. I looked at her once, briefly. The easy smile she'd worn all evening was gone. She was looking at the centerpiece, not at me, not at Linda, not at anyone, just at the flowers in the middle of the table, like she was trying to make herself invisible inside a room she'd been running 40 minutes ago. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't need to. Ryan stood up a few minutes later and came around the table to where I was sitting. He crouched down a little so we were at the same level, which I thought was a kind instinct. Thank you, he said. Seriously, I had no idea. He paused. I hope this wedding weekend feels like what it should, like your family, because you are. I thanked him. I meant that too. The rest of the dinner passed in a way that felt different than the beginning. People came to talk to me. Ryan's aunt, one of his cousins, a friend of the family who had overheard and wanted to say something. I'm not someone who knows what to do with that kind of attention, honestly. I kept defaulting to the same thing I always say, which is that I was just doing my job. But I've been saying that my whole career, and I'm starting to wonder if I should stop because the truth is that teaching doesn't feel like just a job. It has never felt like just a job. Whitney stayed at her end of the table for the rest of the night. She was still social, still charming with the people around her, but she was quieter than usual. She didn't make any more comments about my work. She didn't bring me into any more conversations with a laugh at the end. Before we left, she passed me in the entryway while people were collecting their coats. She stopped and looked at me for a second. I waited. I didn't know you'd done something like that, she said. I considered that for a moment. I do things like that all the time, I said. That's what teaching is. She nodded once, slowly, like she was absorbing something. And then she walked out ahead of me into the parking lot, and neither of us said anything else about it. I drove home that night, thinking about Colin, about the morning I found him sitting outside the classroom door 40 minutes before school started, because he had no one to take him and he didn't want to be late. About the winter hat I kept in my desk for him because he kept forgetting his. About the look on his face when his mom came back in the spring and walked him to the classroom door for the first time, and how he turned around and waved at me through the glass. Nobody stood up at a dinner that year and celebrated what I did for him. Nobody thanked me. His mom sent a card at the end of the year that I still have tucked into the same drawer as his drawing. That was it. And that was enough, because I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it because he needed someone, and I was there and I could. But I'll be honest with you. Sitting at that table and hearing Linda say the words she said, knowing that Colin was 14 and playing soccer and wanted to be an engineer, that meant something to me that I'm still not sure I have the right words for. Teachers don't usually get to know how the story ends. We get 1 year, sometimes two, and then the kids move on and we move on and we hope we did enough. Most of the time, we never find out. We just have to trust that the small, quiet things we did added up to something. That night, I found out they did. Whitney can call it crayons and naptime if she wants. She can laugh at the simplicity of my classroom and the salary that doesn't let me forget I'm a public school teacher in Ohio. She can do all of that, but in that steakhouse in front of everyone she wanted to impress most, the truth showed up anyway. It didn't come from me. I didn't plan it or arrange it or fight for it. It just came, the way the truth usually does when you've been quietly doing the right thing for long enough. Some people spend their whole lives chasing a moment where everyone in the room finally sees them clearly. I got mine on a Thursday night in April, over a steak I barely touched, because a 7-year-old boy remembered what it felt like to have someone in his corner when he had no one else. That is worth more to me than anything Whitney has ever had. I keep thinking about the drawing Colin made when he was 7, the one where I'm wearing a cape. He didn't draw me that way because I did anything extraordinary. He drew me that way because I showed up. Every single day I showed up. And when you are a child with no one in your corner, a person who simply shows up starts to look like a superhero. That's not a small thing. That's everything. What happened at that rehearsal dinner wasn't luck, and it wasn't karma in any magical sense of the word. It was just the natural result of choices made over years. Every morning, I kept crackers in my desk drawer. Every afternoon, I stayed late to do homework beside a boy who was getting himself dressed alone. Every small decision to treat one quiet kid like he mattered, those things accumulated. They compounded. And 6 years later, they walked into a steakhouse in Columbus and sat down at the same table as my half sister. That's how it actually works, I think. Not in dramatic moments, in the accumulation of ordinary ones. Whitney made her choices too. She chose to see my work as something lesser. She chose, in a room full of people she wanted to impress, to use me as a punchline. And the thing about that choice is that it didn't make her look powerful. It just revealed how she measures worth, in salary, in status, in the kind of job that sounds impressive at a dinner party. By that measurement, I've been losing my whole adult life. I don't make a lot of money. I drive a 7-year-old car. I spend my own money on classroom supplies every fall without a second thought. But I know something Whitney doesn't seem to know yet, which is that the things that last are almost never the things that shine the brightest in a room. They're the things that hold up under pressure. The consistent, unglamorous, deeply human work of showing up for people who need you. That is what endures. That is what Linda remembered 6 years later. That is what made her set her wine glass down and look across a crowded table and say, I thought so. I'm not a perfect person or a perfect teacher. I have bad days. I lose my patience. There are students I probably didn't reach the way I should have, and I carry that. But I've tried every year to lead with integrity, to do the right thing even when nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. Colin's family wasn't watching when I kept his hat in my desk. His grandmother wasn't in the room when I brought cupcakes in February. I wasn't building toward a moment at a rehearsal dinner 6 years in the future. I was just trying to be the person I wanted to be. I think that's the only version of strength that actually holds. Not the kind you perform for an audience, the kind that comes from knowing who you are when the room is empty and the only person who sees you is you. Colin is 14 now. He wants to be an engineer. He plays soccer and apparently is doing well in school, and Ivan probably never meet him again, and that's okay. Some of the most important relationships in a person's life are the ones that were only ever meant to last 1 year. But they needed to be the right year, with the right person, and nothing wasted. That's worth more than any title. It's worth more than any salary. It might be worth more than anything.